Okay, so I'll be speaking about the United States versus Lopez Supreme Court case. This happened in 1995, and it was the first Supreme Court case since the New Deal to set limits to Congress's power under the Commerce Clause. So, on March 10, 1992, Alfonso Lopez, a 12th grade high school student, carried a concealed weapon into his San Antonio, Texas high school. The gun was not loaded, and Lopez stated that he was delivering the weapon to another person for $40. He carried a concealed .38 caliber revolver with 5 cartridges. When Lopez was confronted by police and school officials, he admitted to carrying the gun. The next day, Alfonso was charged with violating federal law which banned guns on all school properties. This was known as the Gun-Free School Zone Act of 1990. Lopez appealed his arrest by stating that the creation of the law was unconstitutional. He claimed that the law went beyond the power of Congress to legislate control over public schools. So the district court denied Lopez's notion, concluding that the law was constitutional, a constitutional exercise under the Commerce Clause. The court ruled that Congress possessed the authority to regulate activities that affected schools throughout the United States. So Lopez brought his case to the Fifth Circuit of Appeals. Here's a picture of the office, and the Fifth Circuit overturned the original conviction and stated that the charges were beyond the power of Congress. The case was then appealed to the Supreme Court. So constitutional issues. This case ultimately deals with the Commerce Clause, which describes an enumerated power in the Constitution. And the clause states that Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and several states and with Indian tribes. So the case brings up 2 important questions. The first being, does the Gun-Free School Zone Act exceed Congress's authority under the Commerce Clause? And the second, what may Congress regulate under its commerce power? So the Chief Justice to preside over the case was William Rehnquist. Here's a picture of him. And other associate justices include John Stevens, David Souter, Anthony Kennedy, Sandra Day O'Connor, and Ruth Ginsburg. The government made the argument during the case that the act was constitutional because the buying and selling of guns affects interstate commerce. They claim that gun violence in schools leads to dangerous and less commercially healthy neighborhoods and less economically productive kids. The decision. The Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision written by Chief Justice William Rehnquist, ruled that the Gun-Free School Zone Act was unconstitutional. Lopez's conviction was then therefore overturned. The Supreme Court stated that the Gun-Free School Zone Act exceeded Congress's authority under the Commerce Clause, and Congress had broad power to make laws under the clause. But those powers were limited and did not extend to areas of the Lopez case, such as regulating guns in local schools. So the court decided that the possession of a gun in a local school is not an economic activity that might have a large impact on interstate commerce. A law prohibiting guns near schools is a criminal statute that does not coerce any sort of economic activity. So the Chief Justice, quote for quote, said the respondent was a local student at a local school. There's no indication that he had recently moved in interstate commerce, and there's no requirement that a possession of a firearm had any tie to interstate. So the court stated that the Congress could only constitutionally regulate 3 things under the Commerce Clause. The first, instrumentalities of commerce. The second, the use or channels of commerce. And the third, activities that substantially affect interstate commerce. And then here's the pictures of all the justices involved with the case. There's Rehnquist, O'Connor, Kennedy, Thomas Stevens, Breyer, Scouter, and Ginsburg. So the significance of this case. To appreciate the significance of this case, it's necessary to understand a little bit of the historical context. So Gibbons versus Ogden, and the nature of this of the commerce power is first described in Gibbons versus Ogden. And both during the first century following the adoption of the Constitution, the Supreme Court seldomly had to determine the Congress's authority to legislate under an exercise of its commerce power. And since 1937, the Supreme Court had only expanded Congress's power under the Commerce Clause. So the Supreme Court interpreted the clause literally and narrowly, especially in the United States versus E.C. Knight and Sletcher Poultry versus U.S. And then lastly, to that end, Lopez marked the first time in half a century that Congress had overstepped its powers under the